That's okay. Hey, good afternoon, folks. My name is Mark Alvarado. I'm the executive director here at the club here in Santa Barbara. I want to welcome everybody. Just a couple things. Our restrooms for adults are just right out these breezeway here to your left. Unfortunately, or not fortunately, adults can't use the bathrooms in the lobby because they're designated just for children, and we still have children in the building, so that's kind of a state law that we have to abide by. Just real quick, just wanted to say that we've been open for 3 months since we've taken over after a 4-year hiatus, and we have an art room that's run by the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. They are running out of there. We have AHA in our classroom running programs here. We run athletics program with our athletic director, Jelani Hicks, who's here with us right now. Jelani was a head coach at San Marcos High School, and he's also an assistant at Westmont, and he's helping us out. And also in the ball field, we have 12 and under soccer program starting, and we have our traditional game room. We also have Notes for Notes in our recording studio. We have the dance network that's in our dance studio, and then we have a computer lab, and we're just excited that we're able to host this event. This is really just to demonstrate to the community of Santa Barbara that we're open for these type of civic engagement opportunities so that folks have an opportunity to hear what's going on in the community and specifically what's happening here tonight. So without any further ado, I want to turn it over to Sylvia real quick, who's going to make a brief announcement. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Sylvia Uribe. I'm the interpreter tonight, so whether you speak English or Spanish, if you prefer to have this interpreted into Spanish, please let us know. We're in the back and we have headsets for you. Thank you. Nosotros tenemos aquí unos headsets para dárselos si usted prefiere escuchar este evento en inglés y en inglés sin los audífonos y en español con los audífonos. Yo soy la intérprete. Buenas tardes.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to our District 1 forum. We wanted to do it especially in the East Side. Having district elections and having people in the district choose their representative, you know, we wanted to have this forum in the district to have you get again a chance to hear from each of your candidates. So we have 3 candidates here today, and it's kind of a historic moment because we have, you know, 3 Latino candidates in a district that is a majority Latino, and there's only 2 of those districts in Santa Barbara, and actually, yeah, give a hand for that. And the East Side is the only one with the most percentage of Latino population. So this is a historic moment. We have 2 first-generation women. We have Crucito Cruz, who did a big part in bringing district elections to the city, you know, willing to fight in the courtroom and, you know, put his name out here. He's been on the ballot 7 straight times. You know, you really have to amend that. We have Alejandra Gutierrez. She is the incumbent sitting council member right now. She has been council member for the past 5 years, and you know she wants a chance to earn your vote again. And then we have another challenger, a newcomer, Wendy Santamaria, and she is, you know, an advocate for housing rights in the community and has been an organizer and has really kind of stepped up into this political arena now. And so we're really looking forward to get a chance from all of them. So our intention here tonight is to give you, the voters, an opportunity to hear what all 3 of these candidates have to say about the issues most important to the district and to have you make an informed decision on your ballot on November 5th. We want an uninterrupted forum, so we appreciate all the enthusiasm and clapping, but if we can hold our applause to a minimum after, because we have 3 candidates, we really want to have as many questions as possible. So we'll hold our applause till after. Closing statements will give them a chance we'll let you clap for those ones. We really want to thank DP News for the high school students from Dos Pueblos High School coming here and helping us live stream and record this tonight. So you'll see them in the back. They're really helpful with doing this. It's amazing that they were able to help us. I'll be asking questions, allowing each candidate. We're shooting for 1 minute to respond. We have a clock right here, so you'll see the clock right in front with Rochelle. And we have a Spanish translation, obviously, by Silvia. She already told you about that, so we're really thankful for that. We will be taking audience questions, but we're going to cut that off now. We've already got a lot, and we hope that some of these get answered in the forum, and then we'll definitely get to as many as we can. We're trying to keep this to 90 minutes, but it can get a little longer with some of these. And like Mark said, Boys and Girls Club, for hosting this, the club, as it's now known, thank you for hosting this. They're not endorsing any candidate. Of course, they're not political at all. This is just them helping us host this community forum in the community. So we'll start off and we'll go down the line. And a lot of people talk about their why and what the reason. And, you guys have been walking the community. So Alejandra first, what's the reason you wanted to run again? What have you heard from knocking on doors? And why should voters give you another term on council?
Thank you, Ryan, for that question. I am currently sitting on that seat. I want to run again because I want to finish what I started. I ran for the reason to give locals a voice on council and to have more local representation when creating policy. And what I've heard in door knocking is that there is still a lot of need within that community with infrastructure. In the last 5 years that I've been on council, we've had actually a lot of city resources being poured in District 1 than ever before. They are very concerned about safety, the infrastructure, especially emergency preparedness, and youth and family resources. Also, I have been very instrumental when it comes to really representing local values when creating policy. So when there was a movement to defunding the police and creating our department a more community-based department, I actually helped the chief of police at the time to create an academy where every new officer would come in and have to learn about the history of Santa Barbara and the culture of the residents here.
Thank you so much. Wendy, what motivated you to enter this race? And when you're knocking on doors, what are you hearing? What would be different if you're elected to council?
Let me test this. Perfect. Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Wendy Santamaria. I'm running for city council because I am sick of seeing the neglect in our district. There is a high level of a lack of investment in our community. When I knock on doors, my team and I, we knock doors 6 days a week. We hit hundreds of doors a day, and the common theme that we always hear is, who is our rep? Where is she? That's what we often hear about whatever issue it is, whether it's Allison Street is not lit enough. There are places where our children are crossing the streets and no one's advocated for a stop sign or pedestrian lights in years. Housing, the fact that so many of our working families are getting pushed out. The common theme is always, where's our rep? We can't reach her. We barely know who she is other than her name. And so I've decided to step up and make sure that we have someone that is present, responsive, and willing to take action.
Thank you. Crucito, over to you. Why do you think you should get the voters' vote this election?
Why I think I should get the vote this election. First and foremost, thank you, Ryan Cruz, for taking the initiative so I could participate, and Mary Ann Partridge, muchas gracias. Buenas tardes, good afternoon, guten Tag. My name is Crucito Herrera Cruz, and why I think you should vote for me for District 1 is because I haven't let my community down. I've always fought for district-based elections since 2009 because the city did not allow me to participate. But I learned the law, and the California Voting Rights Act was important for us. Why? Because the American Riviera, the Upper East, San Roque, Mesa, always controlled the politics of the West Side and East Side. It's getting better. The marginalization, the attention through district-based elections is powerful. 3 election cycles, you wouldn't get these candidates like this. I am Americano Chicano. Let's get that straight.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to housing policy. So Crucito, rent control and housing crisis is a big thing here in Santa Barbara. What would you do if elected to tackle this crisis?
First, as an individual, you got to vote yes on Prop 33. Why? If you stand with renters, you stand with the majority of the people in the city of Santa Barbara. 65% of the renters are in the city of Santa Barbara, meaning those individuals can't buy into an affordable house. Rent stabilization is important. Once Prop 33 passes, it is important that the dais legislate protective measures for renters. How? By holding the landlords accountable and holding the threshold of rent control through the percentages when you engage them. Housing is important. Why? The regional housing allocation said for the next 6 years, the housing element, we have to build or identify 8,001 units. Inclusionary housing means people that are earning over $120,000 a year under the MAMI, the average median income. What we forget is the low income, the seniors, the very low income, handicap.
Thank you. Wendy, there's been a lot of talk about rent control, and you've talked about that being just a part of a housing reform package that would tackle the crisis. What does your policy package include?
Thank you, Ryan. Rent stabilization is one part of the housing reform package because our housing crisis cannot be solved with one policy and one policy alone. So rent stabilization would allow us to limit how much rents are going up, particularly from the corporate landlords who have been evicting unjustly so many of our working families. But on top of that, we would also implement a rental registry in which we would be able to register our rentals so that we can keep track of how many units do we actually have in the city, are they habitable, and are the rents going up unjustly? Finally, we would also make sure that we establish a permanent right to counsel in the city. I, along with many in the community, was instrumental in making sure that we got that funding allocated for the pilot program. Now it's time to finish that work that we started in the community. Because unfortunately, I still remember being in that meeting and speaking to an empty chair when our council member was not present. So I want to make sure that I'm in there, that we get affordable housing built in partnership with our housing authority, rent stabilization, a rental registry, and justice for tenants.
And Alejandro, you've been against rent control, and you're saying a lot of mom and pop landlords have expressed concerns about being swept up in the same category as corporate landlords. What policies do you support towards addressing rent prices?
Can you repeat the last part?
Yeah, what policies do you support towards addressing rent prices?
I actually did bring a policy forward a couple of months ago to council to address the housing crisis, which is it's an ADU, being able to get a small private loan from the housing trust fund that we have, and having available already a streamlined process through the community development where somebody can go and buy a model unit of an ADU and build it in their home, and being able to rent it out, but have a covenant. So in the meantime that they're paying off the loan, they will have a covenant where it will be addressing that middle income crisis that we have. But most importantly, rent control does not solve our housing crisis. It has been proven throughout California that every city that has rent control does not lower the rents go up, it gentrifies communities, and especially it hurts the working class. All of the people of color leave. If anybody can tell me where rent control in California has worked, then you should say it now.
All right, so we're going to move on to two of the biggest areas on the east side, Milpas Street and Ortega Park. So Milpas and Ortega are considered the heart of the east side. The residents often say that they don't get the same attention, money, or love as downtown and State Street. How can the city be more effective on Milpas and Ortega Park, and what will you do as a council member to ensure this? Alejandro, we go first.
I've been very vocal about how we spend our money on council. We've spent millions of dollars on State Street. Last week, I was very vocal about trying to open in State Street, part of State Street, because we are wasting a lot of money. Some of that money can go to Milpas, and so we have to be mindful, especially now that we have a deficit, that we make decisions that are going to be effective. And Milpas has shown the entire city that it thrives, even with very little help from the city. But again, it has taken years to get to where we're at, and we are putting a lot of resources into the east side, but Milpas is still a talking point within city staff. And we need more than one vote to push certain decisions on council. And so I do believe that we have to have more council members that understand the different pockets in the community and be mindful when wanting to spend money in one certain area of the city.
Wendy, how can the city be more effective on Milpas and Ortega Park, and what can you do as a council member to ensure this?
Thank you, Ryan, for that question. I do want to point out that in order for us to address Milpas or State Street, you need to show up. And unfortunately, our council member was missing from so many State Street advisory committees that council member Kristen Sneddon had to replace her. And the number one thing in every issue is showing up. And that is the one difference you're going to get with me, is that I will be there because I've been here and I'm not going anywhere. Now, as far as Ortega Park and Milpas goes, there has been way too much investments in the infrastructure updates and everything around the city except in Ortega Park, except on Milpas. We often get neglected, and I want to make sure that we are allocating resources, to make sure that we bring, if the community wants benches, why are we not bringing benches? If the community needs that for accessibility, why aren't we listening to them? Why do we let those emails go unanswered, unheard? It's the same thing with Milpas. I'm talking to business owners out there, and a lot of them actually don't know Ms. Gutierrez and have tried to reach out and there's been nothing there. So we need to allocate resources and a real dedication to making sure that our east side is no longer neglected.
Crucito, how would you address Milpas and Ortega Park, and what would you do as a council member to ensure they get more love?
Thank you for the question. I think it's important. In my ballot statement, it's been about my 3-point plan. It's always been about the social and economic revitalization of the Milpas area and State Street corridor. I was just at Anderson's on State Street, talking with the owner, getting my strawberry torte for my mom and myself. She said that if we're a cardiologist, this artery that goes to our heart is trapped and it's stuck, and it's conglomerating and it's suffering economic, all the business owners from the 400 block to the 1200 block. Here on the Milpas corridor, I've always mentioned in the past ballot statement, we need a business improvement property district on the east side to improve the streets, improve all the crow shit that is on the trees. Again, we look at Ortega Park, there was American Rescue Plan money, ARPA, 20 million. Nothing was invested in our community. And look at the picture, twins, using the same picture from Ortega Park. You better be careful who you choose.
All right, now we're going to move on to the changing demographics of the East Side. We'll start with Crucito. East Side is one of the last majority-minority voting districts. Over the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen the district's Latino and working-class population leave. What are some of the main factors leading to this change in demographics, and what can be done to address it and preserve the East Side culture and character? Crucito, you can go first.
The social, cultural revitalization is important. You create business improvement district. You create a better housing policy that looks at low income, very low income. We start to look at the two big projects that are happening in our community, 711 Milpas and the 632 Tri-County. Those two projects are not suitable in size, character, compatible with the infrastructure that we have. It needs to be improved. So how do you reflect that? Create a corn festival for Milpas and invite the community to celebrate all the businesses here, for instance.
Wendy, what are some of the main factors leading to this change in demographics, and what can be done to address it?
Thank you, Ryan. One of the biggest factors has been stagnant low wages and high cost of living. High cost of housing has always been the thing, and we need to look at where our city is prioritizing its resources and its efforts. For example, the proposed hotel on Garden Street that is in the Funk Zone, that is in our district, is an abomination in my opinion. It is 250 hotels in 6 affordable housing units. That doesn't do anything for our community. Housing is at the nexus of why we have so many working families having to leave, because you can't afford to be here and buy a home if you're living paycheck to paycheck. So that is why housing is one of the biggest priorities I have. It's not the only priority, because we also need to take care of public safety. We need to look at environmental sustainability. We need to make sure that we are protecting our most vulnerable communities from floods and other natural disasters. It has to be an all-encompassing thing, but the nexus of it is everyone deserves a stable, safe home, no matter where they were born, no matter where they're from.
And Alejandra, how would you address this change in demographics and preserve East Side's culture and character?
I am going to address the last question as well. I do want to remind everybody in this room that Ortega Park came to a halt because I was very vocal about not taking down all of those murals. Those murals were already programmed to be taken down, and the community didn't participate. And I went head-to-head with city staff to bring that cultural awareness. So I do want to remind everybody that Ortega Park's murals are still up because I advocated for it. Being able to preserve the essence of the East Side community. What has happened during COVID, there was a lot of outside investors that came to invest in the district. And the policies that we've created on council has affected the decision-making of people that stay in this community. There has been locals that have to move because they don't have the opportunities to be able to buy a home or even rent. And these stricter, more rent protections are really going to put a hold on people trying to move up in this community.
And now we're going to move on to the city budget. So we're going to start with you, Alejandro. The city budget is expecting a $7 million deficit this year, and revenues aren't coming in strong enough to keep up with the growing cost of salaries, insurance, and construction for new projects. What is the city not doing, and what kind of steps could be taken to right the ship and balance the budget?
Thank you for that, District. As Chair of Finance, actually, I just got a report last week. And I'll remind everybody again, being able to make effective decisions on councils make a huge impact, especially in our city budget. We started with a deficit of a 2.5, and after council took certain actions, creating certain policies, moving the budget around, it went to a 7.5 million in deficit. So we are in the reds. And what did council want to approve is a tax. And I don't believe that we need to tax our residents in a time of inflation and crisis to be able to balance our books. What we need to do is be very courageous and make decisions that are not popular to be more effective of how we're managing our money. Because adding more tax, it's not the solution.
And we'll move on to you, Wendy. So what is the city not doing with its budget, and what kind of steps could be taken to right the ship and balance that budget?
Thank you for that question, Ryan. Since Ms. Gutierrez brought up Measure I, I'm happy to discuss that. I think the tax thing is something that it shouldn't be based on one person's opinion. I am going out into the community and speaking to my neighbors, our first responders, and people see this tax as an investment in our community. And I often think, okay, I am not a big fan of taxes, right? Especially if it's going to affect our lower working class. We need to make sure that we don't lose services, but I want to explore other taxes that are not going to be impacting our low-income community. For example, our transient occupancy tax, our cruise ship tax. There are different things that we need to be putting this burden on the transient tourists, on the folks that are not really contributing anything to the community, but do get to enjoy it. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that our taxes are going to something that is actually going to give us something in return. Our taxes have been paying her salary for almost 5 years, and the residents have seen nothing. So that's one way we can start to be fiscally responsible.
And Crucito, what is the city not doing with its budget, and what kind of steps could be taken to balance this budget?
This is critical. This is the heart, this is the function, the livelihood of all our taxpayers. As taxpayers of the city of Santa Barbara, the city is failing us. The government over expenditures and overspending is not cool. Why? For the past 12 quarters, 3 years, we have been in a structural deficit. There's no way that could be possible when TOT tax is super strong, property tax is super strong, sales tax is rebounding. However, we should be more fiscally conservative with the money. There's no way we could be 3 years in the making of structural deficits. The Measure I, 7.1 deficit, is just to offset the unbalanced budget. There has been no measures taken by the Finance Committee nor the City Council to correct this problem. And what that means is the city employees are overburdened with work and we don't get services.
All right, we're going to move on to the dynamics of City Hall. So being able to come to solutions for city's biggest issues requires working with council members and city staff. Crucito, have you met with the current council and staff, and how do you think you would work with them if elected?
Please repeat the question.
Have you met with any of the current council members or staff, and how do you think you would work with them if elected?
I think harmonizing cohesiveness as colleagues on the dais, it would be important to listen to my colleagues and the concerns of their district, because district-based elections require within the municipal ordinance district-based management plans for capital infrastructure, for things that are happening in our community, to create programming, positive programming in our community. So I have talked a little bit with Oscar Gutierrez, but that's about it.
And Wendy, on to you. Have you met with any of the current council and staff, and how do you think you would work alongside them if elected?
Thank you, Ryan. I have met with the majority of the current city council. I think the only one I haven't met with, like one-on-one, has been Mayor Randy Rouse, and I think Eric Friedman, I haven't met with him. Every other person I've met with city staff. I've even met with you. When you used to come to the meetings, then, we would be able to discuss these things. So we want to make sure that we are coming together to really bring these solutions to the table, because right now there is so much divisiveness. Right now our city council is a majority conservative. Like, let's be real, that's what it is. And it's been voting against working families. So once I'm on the city council, I will be the final progressive vote we need so that we can actually move some progress forward. And that gives me a lot of hope, because I can hit the ground running, because I've been working with our city staff, I've been working with our city council for years, especially in the absence of our own representative.
And Alejandra, what have you learned from working at City Hall during this term, navigating the relationships with other council members and staff?
One vote doesn't make a difference. You have to build relationship with city staff. Actually, city staff is the one that actually has the power. As council members, we do have the power when agenda items come to council and we vote. But if you can promise the world to people, but if you don't have other people on council that you can work with to actually pass policy, nothing will happen. So when people say that I'm not for renter protection, I am, because every renter protection that has been passed in the last 5 years, I voted for. The only thing I didn't vote for was rent control. And to have a candidate to sit here in front of you that she's going to solve the housing crisis with rent control, she's one issue. It's rent control, and it's rent control, and it's rent control. When we actually have to work with everybody, bring community together to build housing, affordable housing, actually shorten that gap that we have. We are spending a lot of money giving to nonprofits, which we need, that very low, extreme low housing. But what about that middle class? What about the working class? We need a path to ownership, and rent control is not going to cut it.
All right, Alejandro, I want to give you a chance to address some of the criticism you heard tonight and some of the criticism that's been out in the public. You've been noted that you've missed meetings or not showed up to city events. Some noted that you weren't too much involved with the Democratic Party until recently, and you just received the Democratic Women's endorsement. What do you say to these claims and criticisms, and to voters who are worried about these issues?
I actually find it a waste of time, and we need to, I just really want to set the record straight. I was extremely ill, and I did miss meetings. Those meetings that I missed that people say that I wasn't present, I didn't come out in the open because city staff knew, and city staff wasn't going to open it to the public because it would be a violation of HIPAA. I do have the privacy of my own health, and being open about something so private, it's not something that it's okay to weaponize me with. Why don't we start focusing on the real issues? Because I have been very present when it comes to those hard conversations. So when people on council want to defund the police and there's a drive-by shooting in my district and nobody shows up but the community members in that district and law enforcement to solve that case, we really have to be mindful of when you attack somebody because of health issues. The reason that I won by 8 votes was because I have been present. I have served my community for over 20 years. I've helped families, first-generation students, to go on to higher education. I've helped families navigate the education system. I've helped local business owners to gain resources from the local government and have a voice. I played a critical role in bringing one of the biggest property owners downtown to participate with the city to invest more money in the downtown. The Funk Zone is now being organized, and I'm helping those folks to be organized to have a voice on council. The youth, a lot of the youth that I helped are now getting involved in campaigns. Thanks.
And Wendy, some of the criticism you've received is that you're too focused on one issue candidate, and you're too much of a quote-unquote activist. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Great question. Thank you, Ryan. I do believe the corporate landlord lobby has one issue themselves. I think they're the one issue one issue party here because their whole goal and the whole goal of Ms. Gutierrez on the city council has been to block rent stabilization and block so many tenant protections. A lot of the tenant protections we've passed in the recent years has been because of the community, and it hasn't been because of her. It's been in spite of her absence and her lack of advocacy. So, I mean, we need to make sure that for this, we need to make sure that we are coming together. And I do want to address the healthcare issue because I want to be very clear, we should not be even inquiring about Ms. Gutierrez's health. But this is 5 years, and we can see on the minutes on the city council when somebody's absent. It's one thing for everything to be closed for COVID and then you're on Zoom, that makes sense. It's another for it to say absent, late, and miss the important financial discussions. So at the end of the day, rent stabilization is only one of many issues. We have sustainability in our environment, we have labor, we have so many things that we need to work with, our small businesses, so our east side can really thrive.
And Crucito, you've run for the past 7 elections, and you've 6. This is going to be number 7. So some of the criticism you received is that you're not there during the off seasons, and you're there during election season. How will you address those criticisms?
I'm always here in my community working and empowering our community. I'm the only one that carries the income tax books of an S corporation, a small proprietor, and a business landowner next to McDonald's. I learned all that at H&R Block. All my work ethic came working at Doghouse, working at Thrifty Juniors, Video City Store 2, H&R Block. In 4th grade, with my bigger brother, we were part of the newspaper, Santa Barbara News Press paper route in 1984, before breakdancing. So the situation, I'm always in my community. I'm always giving service. As an income tax preparer, I want to apply those skills and hold my city accountable for better services and to invest in the low-income community. For instance, I spoke with Rob Fredericks, the Executive Director of Housing. This is their housing plan. There's a 5,000 waiting list. They expect a 4,000 more. There's a big need. No one's looking at that.
All right, and back to you, Crucito. There's a lot of concerns about outside interests in City Hall's voting, and some people are concerned that Wendy is very close to advocacy organizations and Alejandro is very close to developers. What would you do to ensure that your vote is not, tainted by any outside interest groups?
In my campaigns, I'm a wishful thinker. I've never accepted campaign contributions. I put my own money, my own time to raise the issues of my community. I don't want to be susceptible to people that give me money. That's why it's her in my campaign. That's why you don't see signs. That's why you don't see the literature. It's a nonpartisan campaign, but it acts extremely partisan, as we can tell. She barely registered in Alisos in May. They would consider her a carpetbagger. Oh my Lord. Or barely in May. So when we look at these things, she's trying to disenfranchise our community. She attacks my colleague and the incumbent, which is not fair. If we keep to issues, low income, inclusionary housing is for middle income, but there's no municipal code under Title 30, Section 130. Nothing for low income, nothing for seniors, nothing to advance the people that get to middle income. So I'm involved, brother. I'm involved.
And Wendy, I want to give you a chance to address what he just said also, and then how can you ensure voters that you won't be voting on behalf of groups?
Sure. I don't live on Alisos, full disclosure. But at the end of the day, I have been organizing this community with or without organizational support because I live here, my family lives here, I live paycheck to paycheck, and I need to be able to make sure that we can get our message out. So yeah, I have support from a lot of our community organizations, our City Workers Union, SEIU 620. I'm okay being held accountable to our city workers. Like that doesn't bother me at all. Cause Action Fund is another one. They are primarily a grassroots organization with community leaders who have been putting in the work for decades. I'm fine being accountable to that. And as far as, Democratic Party or partisan. It's true, this is not a partisan race, so that shouldn't even matter. The Dem endorsements shouldn't even matter that much. Just look at the record. Look at who's funding us, because it's true, we do need to look at who's funding us, and look at what we've done in the last 5 years at the very least, which is where she's been. So let's look at the real issues.
And Alejandra, regarding your close relationships with developers and people who have donated to your campaign, same question, how can you ensure voters that you won't just be voting on behalf of these interests?
I want to remind everybody that my opponent in her camp has keep on repeating, bringing up my absences. I actually took the time with my team to actually look up the absences, and I have the record, so if anybody wants to meet with my team to make an appointment, we can walk through those absences. You would be surprised at how other council members have missed the same or even more meetings, council meetings that I have. And so, for the record, if anybody wants to talk to me about those meetings, I have the data. Also, this narrative that I am being, in the pockets of developers. If everybody would actually look at the facts, if you look of who has contributed, I have contributions from individuals from my district throughout the whole city. Yes, there are developers that have contributed to my campaign, but most importantly, I also have one of the biggest labor unions in the nation that has backed me up. It's the third largest labor union that actually, it's funny, so I'm getting bashed because I get developers money, but at the same time, I get union money of the trades, and who pays those workers? It is the developers. And who builds the houses? It's those developers. So if you want housing, we all have to work together.
And now we're going to move on to the Funk Zone, which, as Wendy mentioned, it's a part of District 1, and it's one of the more vibrant parts, too. Its popularity has drawn a lot of interest in big projects, like we mentioned, the 250-room Garden Street Hotel. We'll start with Alejandra. What's your opinion on the growth of the Funk Zone and the potential of these large-scale projects to change the area?
The Funk Zone has actually brought a lot of life to that area, but it's also given locals a place to gather. A lot of locals don't feel a part of the State Street culture, and these new developments are definitely something that I think just not myself but my colleagues are a little scared of, because it is going to change the dynamic of the entire city, not just the Funk Zone. But we also have state laws that unfortunately do not help cities like Santa Barbara, and so we have to come to an agreement. We have to work with these developers to keep the essence of the community, but by isolating them or wanting to, just say no, we can't do that, because we also can't go against what state law provides them to build. But we need to come together as a community, and those large units, developments do hurt the essence of this community.
Wendy, what is your opinion on the growth of the Funk Zone and the potential for these large-scale projects to change the area?
Thank you, Ryan. There's a lot of businesses in the Funk Zone. There's a big art scene there that has been there for a very long time. And a lot of folks, both locals and tourists that come through, that is a very vibrant place that stimulates our local economy. All that to say, we need to preserve it. And we need to make sure that we aren't selling that little piece of our district out to a developer that only wants to build a humanless hotel so that they can get as much profit as possible without paying anybody. It's outrageous that we would even consider letting this happen when we have such a shortage of housing. I want to make sure that we are protecting the businesses in the Funk Zone as much as we protect the businesses on Milpas and as much as we protect the businesses on State Street. And to be honest, I don't think our city has been doing enough to protect them, so that's where we need to start. We need to actually be investing in them and making sure that whatever policies we're pushing for is not going to be prioritizing hotels over housing. I will always remain steadfast in this: housing over hotels, always.
And Crucito, what do you think about the growth of the Funk Zone in recent years and the potential for these big projects?
Well, I think if we extrapolate why the economic engine now is at the Funk Zone, is because the 1200 block doesn't have thorough traffic. It's not open. So all the traffic just congregates and cruises in the Funk Zone, the new economic engine. which they're getting economic windfall. If we're a data-driven city, we need facts. What do? We ask for a report of COVID sales tax, pre-COVID, COVID, after COVID, Funk Zone, State Street, to make a comparison, intelligent comparison. No one has asked for that. Hopefully Christensen or my friend here, Alejandro Gutierrez, can ask the city for the State Street Master Plan, SSMP, for that data prior to making any engagement of giving $200 million for the Grand Paseo, right? So we got to be careful because all the planning process might hurt us at the end.
And we're going to move on to some of the things that would be coming across City Council. So first thing, we'll start with you, Cristito. There's a sales tax coming up, half-cent sales tax that could potentially bring in $15 million a year and would go towards public safety, 911, and housing and things like that. Do you think that this sales tax should be passed by voters, and do you support it?
Well, personally, as an individual, I'm voting against it. Why? Because Measure C that was passed in 2017 had the same themes, same ideas. Now we're passing another half-cent tax upon the taxpayers. It's totally unfair. Why? In my income tax preparation skills for 20 years, I have learned that the structural deficit can be fixed. That means projects are just being spent and they're milking it. Milking the projects is just writing it until you get full benefit profit from it. So the thing is, what's critical for the half-cent tax is to say no. What do? If we're a tourist-based economy and the TOT is just always strong and going up, we should tax the hotels 3%. So we can invest that tourist-based economy back into the housing, but affordable housing market, what our community needs. Win-win situation.
And Wendy, do you support the proposed sales tax?
Thank you, Ryan. I have been speaking with our first responders, and I want to vote the way that our city staff and first responders have recommended, which is voting yes. And so I will not be putting my own personal beliefs into this because this position is about doing what's good for our community. Now, personally, I do have some doubts because taxes are not the way, in my opinion, to fund a government, not the only way that we should be funding a government, especially if it's a tax on our low-income folks. So I want to make sure that if it passes, and I'm on the city council, it's going to go into the general fund, and we need to make sure that we have clear priorities. Public safety, housing, those need to be at the top, because oftentimes our community resources are often the first to get cut once we see these budget cuts. And now that we're in the red, we're going to potentially see cuts to library services. I don't want to see that. I want to make sure that we preserve and protect our community services. So if our staff and our first responders recommend that we vote yes, I'm personally voting yes, but I'm happy that this is going to be left up to the voters so that we can all decide.
Alejandra, do you support the sales tax?
I've been very vocal about not supporting this regressive tax. A regressive tax affects those people that make less. It'll affect deeply the District 1, the last working class. The way that this was proposed to council to bring a tax to the people, the way they surveyed, they only surveyed about 60 to 60 people in my district. And when I asked this question on council, how will we see this money if the voters say yes on this tax? The money will come in, it will go directly to the general fund, and then it's a free-for-all. Even though we have all these priorities, as you know, politicians always find a loophole to get that money. But this money is going to go directly to the debt that we have. And then eventually it'll go to housing or law enforcement. If we really wanted to invest money in our law enforcement and fire, we would make a specific tax for them. And that's how you ensure that your money is going to specific things.
And we'll stay with you, Alejandra. So State Street, as Cristito mentioned, this idea of a Grand Paseo and the State Street Master Plan and keeping 8 blocks of it kind of close to cars. What do you feel about that plan, and do you think that it should be changed for the short term versus the long term? What do you think?
Thanks for that question. I was sitting at the State Street Master Committee. I was actually very instrumental in picking somebody that's outside of politics to actually chair that committee. And the reason that I stepped down was because my colleague kindly offered herself to take over since I was going through medical issues. So it wasn't out of neglect, first of all. We had voted as a council to eventually close down State Street, and this is why we brought communities together to create a plan. But in the meantime, as council, we have to change things downtown if it's not working. That plan is still in the works, but if we keep on investing on State Street to be fully closed, we are losing money. We are in debt. We have to be very mindful of how we spend our money. But the plans are beautiful, but we are just in the works.
Wendy, what's your opinion on the State Street Master Plan, both the short term and the long term?
Thank you, Ryan. I want to make sure that the future of State Street is taking into consideration, A, making sure that first responders can get through, that we have an accessible path for pedestrians. What I really want to see is us do something about those bikes. Because there's a lot of us who like to bike, but sometimes it can be a little bit dangerous with the e-bikes. And so I want to make sure that we are taking some preventative measures so that we can make State Street a safe place for folks, whether they're walking, biking, driving. At the end of the day, you know, opening State Street, closing it, let's talk to the businesses. I've talked to some of the businesses. I haven't gone to every one of them yet, but I'm working on that. And our other council members have done the same. They've been talking to them, and if you ask, for example, Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, he's spoken to them too, and they've told them, you know, our sales are actually up because we have foot traffic, right? So we can't put our own political biases into this. What's going to be better for the businesses? What's going to be better for our community? That's what I'm guided by.
And Crucito, what do you think about these new plans for State Street?
The SSMP, the State Street Master Plan, is well thought out conceptually. It's an idea. But prior to going to idea, it should go to the voter as a referendum to ask the question, do you want State Street open? Prior to the 3 years of dialogue and planning that they have for this Grand Paseo, the new idea for State Street, Old Town Santa Barbara, it's critical that we look at it and it not be mishmash. The artery, as a cardiologist would say, Santa Barbara is hemorrhaging because it doesn't allow cars to go up all the way down this main artery of Santa Barbara. I stand with Roundy Rouse. Let's open it. Why? Because it's causing economic stagnation from the 400 to the 1200 block. If you can't show me data from the city about the sales tax, pre-COVID, COVID, after COVID, all the way down to the funk zone, well then, we'll let other people decide that for us in the committee.
All right, we're going to move on to some of the audience submitted questions, and we're going to try to get through as many as we can before giving you guys a chance to do closing statements. So first, we're going to talk about hotel moratoriums and short-term rentals. We'll start with you, Crucito, and come down the line. So what do you think? Would you support a hotel moratorium stopping any new hotels? And what do you think should be done with these illegal short-term rentals? There's over 1,500, they think.
Well, the short-term rentals, STR, is ingrained in our municipal law, right? And so we have to look at it, we have to have the registry, but short-term rentals takes away from renters and home households. That's difficult when the housing market's already super tight in our community. So we have to look at it to see how we could change that program to make it more conducive for renters. I know that they've generated some revenues for not being in compliance, so it's small money, but it's hurting our community. The housing crunch is important that we build and invest in the housing trust fund, to have an allotment that's permanently established to build affordable housing, because developers might not have the incentive to develop if it's really affordable, right? So we need more of that.
And Wendy, do you support a hotel moratorium, and what do you think we should do about short-term rentals?
Thank you, Ryan. I do support a hotel moratorium. We have plenty of small businesses, little hotel boutiques, that I would love to drive the business to them and not introduce more competition into the market. It doesn't do us any good. In addition, our community is desperately lacking affordable housing. We need to prioritize affordable housing over hotels, and yes, over short-term rentals. As my colleague here, Crucito, mentioned, he's absolutely correct. Short-term rentals only take away from the affordable rental housing stock, and we do currently have a short-term short-term rental crackdown, right? And it's actually been yielding really good results, and it's came under budget. I think we need to make that stronger. We really need to crack down on these Airbnbs, because at the end of the day, if you want to make profit, it's actually more stable profit for you to have a long-term renter. And as long as you're a good landlord, the tenant's going to want to stay there, because housing is a literal need. It's not a luxury. We're going to need to stay there. So I want to make sure that we're prioritizing our current housing stock to be available for the families that keep the city running.
And Alejandro, do you support a hotel moratorium, and what do you think about the short-term enforcement right now?
So these two issues we're currently now tackling on council. We had, a month ago, we had a meeting with the Planning Commission, a joint meeting with council and the Planning Commission, to talk about certain zones where we want to stop hotel buildings, because we understand that that's an issue. Being part of the Finance Committee, I actually voted to be able to allocate money to have this pilot program to crack down on illegal Airbnbs. And it has been successful, but my biggest question when talking about this pilot program is, okay, we have now identified all of these Airbnbs and we've charged, we got a certain amount of money back, but what are we doing to work with the property owners to bring those houses back where people can rent them? And in order for us to stop building hotels, to get more housing, we need to start working with the community. We need to start building our relationships instead of having the government just going in there and cracking down. We need to start building a private-public relationship to build houses.
All right, then we're going to stay with you, Alejandro, then go down the line. What is your opinion on street vendors? And there's been, talk about cracking down locally and also at the state level, kind of protecting street vending. So where do you stand on that, and do you think it's a problem on the east side?
I think it's not just a problem in the east side, it's a problem in the entire city, and it comes down to safety. I have been very careful to actually speak in public about street vending, because I understand why the workers are working, but I also understand that there's a bigger mission behind it, and it's not always legal and it's not safe. But what happens when you have illegal street vendors, you're taking money and clients away from the restaurants and businesses that we have in the city that are paying a lot of taxes, that are putting a lot of money into their business to be able to be up to code. And we also don't have the manpower to stop all these street vendors, but it's safety. It's also a health hazard. You have open flame. But we have a process where people can get their license, and the process is fairly easy. But as a community, we also have to educate and create a culture to support our local businesses.
Wendy, what do you feel about street vendors on the east side?
Thank you, Ryan. I actually agree with Ms. Gutierrez that this is an issue, but at the same time, these are working families just trying to make ends meet. So I want to make sure that we meet in the middle and we really talk to community about how we can address this. So it's true, it's a safety issue, and we need to make sure that they're getting their permits, that they're getting their food handler's license, and most importantly, that we are designated. I want to work with our city council to designate micro business zones in the city where there aren't other restaurants around, where they're not going to be taking business from other restaurants and existing businesses, and let them operate there, right? But it needs to be in a bit of a controlled setting, because it's true, these things can get out of hand. And I would want to make sure that we prioritize local businesses, folks that already live in our community who want to start up a business, let them get a spot at this first. We need to make sure we're prioritizing our local community to make sure that we're uplifting those entrepreneurs, but I don't think we're ever going to just stop. We're not going to put a border up and say no vendors. We need to work with them so that it's safe and that it prioritizes the well-being of our local community.
And Crucito, what do you think about street vendors on the east side?
The current program that we have for the vendor street program, it's all right. It needs improvement. Right now, they have warrants for arrest. They could cite people administratively for selling illegally or not having a business permit. If they're part of our community and live in our community, we should integrate them. We should provide a permitting process to integrate them. Again, there's issues of health hazards, propanes next to gas stations. Those all need to be covered. Again, people that are coming from out of town should not be here. But for the people that are trying to be local entrepreneurs and trying to start up as a small business entrepreneur and they live in our community, we should have a vendor street program that helps integrate them in a safe place, in a confined space that is like a little plaza in Mexico or little mercadito, like the cultural aspects in Los Angeles, where you can go to a certain location and you have 12 little businesses. A little mercadito would be appropriate for the east side, because then you can have the eclectic services of food that we are, the diversity of Milpas, because District 1 is the most diverse. Look at us in the audience. So, time, Spencer, time.
All right, we're going to move on to another audience question. So Casa de la Raza and to some extent the club right here have both gone through some tough times, almost nearly having to close. How do we save these cultural hubs? We'll start with you, Crucito, and come back down the line. And what can be done to support these community centers more?
Well, may we say God bless Tomas Abraham Costello. He passed away August 15th. He was a UCLA Juris Doctorate attorney, tax attorney in our community, the founder and the landowner of 601 East Montecito. I got my politics from La Casa La Raza. I got my activism from La Casa La Raza. We ran Mark Baca against Gil Garcia in 1994. That's when the seed was planted in my membrane and in my heart that we need representation. La Casa La Raza could have been helped by our government when it was going through tax liens. Right now, it's a place that needs to be resurrected and supported through the city, through ARPA money. Nothing was invested in the $20 million that came down the pipeline in District 1. Why?
Wendy, how do you feel about La Casa de la Raza and the club and supporting community centers?
It's absolutely instrumental that we protect and preserve these spaces, not just because I think so. These are spaces for our youth. And that is who we need to prioritize, because we're losing third spaces for our youth. For a lot of our youth, I mean, once they're off school, it's like, where do they go? When it's the summer. I remember when it was this summer and the East Side Library closed, and I remember hearing a lot of parents being like, well, I was going to send my kid to the East Side Library, right? What's happening there? And so back to Casa and the Boys and Girls Club in particular, I agree with Crucito. I think our city really needs to step up and search for CDBG grants. We need to find some source of revenue for these spaces, because these are just as crucial as any other basic necessity. In my opinion, being able to create accessible third spaces for our youth is part of what makes a community healthy. And if we are just sending kids school, home, that's not going to be conducive to anything. So I'm a huge advocate of making sure we protect these spaces.
Alejandra, how would you support keeping these community centers alive?
So during my time on council, we actually made the Casa de la Raza a historical landmark. And I'm a local. I've walked through these spaces. I think they're very important to the growth of a young individual. I think that a lot of my political drive actually came from the La Casa de la Raza. My dad worked at the Casa de la Raza when he came from Mexico. He was the janitor there. He worked with Cesar Chavez, and actually he worked with all the mural artists that you see the murals now in our cities. We have to, most importantly, we have to change the culture that exists right now. We are very divisive as the Latinx community. There's been a lot of change in leadership in these hubs. We have to unite and be able to be one voice, to go to council and advocate for that funding. But when we are bashing one another and we cannot come together for the common good, the greater good of this community, not our political priorities or our biases, but for the future of the children, that's when we're going to create change. Because the adults, the activists that I knew, never got paid. And they saw for the future of this city. They fought for those children to have a space.
Thank you. This is another audience-submitted question. How would you, because there's a lot of talk about incentivizing people to build affordable housing, how would you go about incentivizing landlords to both rent to local families and build for affordable housing and for local families?
We have to start at the city level. The permitting process, I've said it over and over, it is broken. We have to make it easier for somebody to obtain a permit, to be able to build, to even change the simplest things of like putting windows. And the way that we actually incentivize developers is to actually bring them to the conversation, have a seat at the table and have a voice. We have to be able to work together. We have to be very honest with each other. If we want affordable housing, we have to look at what's the cost of affordable housing. So if we're asking the developers to put in the money for affordable housing, so what is the city going to do to help them out? And that's how I think we're going to be able to incentivize developers. What was the other part of the question? Sorry.
And to rent to local families.
To rent with local families. We, again, as policymakers, if we continue creating these divisive policies, our local families are going to be the ones affected because the landlords are going to be very strict on their standards of who they're renting to. And so our local families actually are the first ones to get affected by those policies.
Wendy, how do you think we can incentivize landlords to rent to local families and to developers to build affordable housing?
Thank you, Ryan. I would love to explore a local preference ordinance. I know there's some cities that have implemented this, and what that does essentially is it mandates for landlords to first prioritize giving that rental unit to someone that's in the community, an essential worker, a nurse, a teacher, a firefighter. Those are the ones that really need this, and unfortunately, we see far too often, students coming in or other transient folks who are only here for a couple years and then leave. And that's only taking away from the folks that have a long-term life here, that have children here, that have children in their schools. And we need to make sure that as far as developers go, let's be real, developers are profit-driven, like that, we can't really deny that. So they're going to act in the way that gives them the most profit. And if we allow the city to be for sale and go to the highest bidder, we are only going to keep getting market unit rates. So we need to make sure that we put some limitations. We live in a beautiful enough city that we can get selective. What do we want built? Do we want a multi-use building that has maybe a daycare and affordable housing units on top? I'd love that. Do we want it next to other businesses so that there's more foot traffic? Absolutely. But I think we need to make sure that we show up and that we mention that those priorities are our standard. Let's raise the standards for the city.
And Crucito, how do we incentivize affordable housing and incentivize landlords renting to local families?
I think we have to take a real initiative, be strong in the policies. If we have an inclusionary housing ordinance under Title 30, Chapter 30, for middle-income households over 120,000 and upper middle income, we should also have an ordinance for low income, very low income, and extremely low income, because the regional housing allocation for the next year requires that we identify 8,000 units for the whole spectrum. We know that rent is too high, right? And so we have to create legislation that empowers the ones that are not being looked at, the low income, the working class. And that's the majority of District 1. So what do we need to do? We need to create legislation that protects seniors, low income, very low income in the MAI. I know people that live off $20,000 a year in this community in the East Side. So we need to do more.
All right, and we're going to start with Crucito, and these are all specific to each candidate. So Crucito, I'm going to ask you first, if you don't support a sales tax for the city, how do you propose the city make up for that deficit going forward in the future and the lack of revenues?
Well, I think in creating economic measures to making sure people don't over budget within their departments, cost-saving measures within each department. Because for the last 12 quarters, 3 years, there's been a structural deficit because they've allowed the projects to continue to the next year. So there's really not a structural deficit. They're just allowing the projects to continue on for the next year, which is not necessarily proper accounting. Again, at that same time, we have to be more conservative in the way we spend, because we have enough money as a budget that's coming in through sales tax, property tax, Measure C. Now, if we put this Measure I, it's just going to offset the deficit that's being implemented for 25 and 26. 2026 fiscal year, so we have to change that.
And then this one's for Wendy. You supported a rent board and rental registry. How would the city account for paying for that? Would it come from staff money and stuff like that?
Great question. I'm glad you asked this. So in other cities where the rent board and rental registry has been implemented, it's actually self-funded. So the rental registry, the way it works is, say that a landlord has, let's say, 5 units, and the rental registry fee is, just an example, $20 per unit per year. Let's just say that that's what it is. Some cities will mandate, the landlord has to pay all that because they're the ones with the capital. Other cities will say, you can actually split that between the tenant and the landlord. So $10 per year the tenant pays, and the landlord pays $10 per unit per year. All of that money goes into funding the rent board, into having some of the paid staff there that is going to enforce the rent stabilization ordinance, but more importantly, serve as a board where we can take case-by-case scenarios with our mom and pops who are going through economic hardship, because I don't know if Prop 33 is going to pass, but if it passes and rent stabilization is able to cover everybody, we still need to make sure that we are protecting mom and pops, and if they need to raise their rents higher than whatever the limit is, we do need to be flexible. It can't just be a catch-all. So there's a funding mechanism for it, which is self-sustaining, but we would still want to make sure that we look for other revenue resources so that we are never left in the red.
And then Alejandra, you said you wouldn't support a rent control, but is there a number? The statewide cap right now is about 5% plus interest, which is about 8.8. Is there a number that you would agree to on a rent cap at this moment? And is there any number that you would be willing to compromise on?
Thank you for reminding everyone that we do live in a rent control state, so it's 5% plus regional CPI. So when you talk about wanting to implement a rent registry, let's be real. The city of Santa Monica has a rental registry, and it's going to cost the city between $3 million to $5 million to be able to administrate that rent registry. It's not self-sustained, let's be real here, because you need to have a city staff who we need to pay, and we have to have order and be able to collect the fees. Where the fees are actually going to go to is to the renter. So that is going to add to the debt that we have. Remember, we are in a debt. Putting a rent cap, the reason that it's not sustainable is because we have inflation right now. There are homes that their insurance are being canceled. Everything has gone up. Also, when you put a rent cap, you're also helping those people that are not in need. So the lawyers, the doctors, the engineers, people that have, a corporate that have multi-units, they're also going to benefit from that. And again, what happens when you're in rent control, it reduces the development of housing.
All right, and we're going to move on to another audience-submitted question. So a lot of people in the city have spoke about a need for increased wages. I think across the board, I think most people here would like a wage increase. I know I would. What would you do, we'll start with Alejandra and move down the board, to foster more wage increases in the city for workers?
So we just actually sunset our living wage committee because we have met our goals as a city to be able to give our city staff a living wage. And since I've been on council, I have approved for an increase for city staff to be able to pay the rent. And so the increases in wages have been happening. And that is also part of why we have a deficit in the city. And so I think that actually the city of Santa Barbara provides a lot of work where the wages are actually higher than other cities, and that's why you see a high commute percentage coming into the city, because the wages are a lot more decent than other cities surrounding the county.
Wendy, how would you address wage increases?
Thank you, Ryan. So with the endorsement of our local city workers union, SEIU 620, they can count on me on standing in solidarity with them always. Whenever their contract negotiations come up, it's important that a city council is pro-labor, pro-working class, and that we make sure that we're advocating to protect the wages and benefits of our city essential workers. As far as those are city employees, right? Now, as far as the private market goes, cost of living is really just two sides of the same coin. Low wages, high cost of housing. So if you're not controlling for the cost of housing, it's the cost is now being passed on to the local businesses, because now the local businesses have to pay higher so that they can afford to keep employees who actually can live in the city and can make it to work on time. So it's either, do we put the burden on these corporate landlords who many don't even live in our city, or do we put the strain on our local businesses? I'd much rather put the strain on the corporations that aren't even in this community and save our local businesses.
And Crucito, how would you address wage increases?
Oh, I'll definitely vote for Prop 32 to raise the minimum wage here in California. I would definitely support it comparable to also the federal wage that is going to be increased to $16 the following year. And, you know, it's trying to get to $18 to $20. I would support such measures.
All right, and that's the end of our questions. We want to have a chance to have closing statements. I really want to thank you guys all for respecting and not applauding. We'll give a chance to applaud all of them right now if you would like. And I would really just want to thank all three of our candidates for staying on time with our timer. Like it was great. We didn't have to have Mark turn on the buzzer and have them hurry up. So we really respect that. We were able to get to a lot of questions. So we wanted to start first with Alejandra, the incumbent, and we'll give you 3 minutes for this. Just give your closing statements, why people should vote for you. You can add any endorsements and anything you'd like to add at all.
I want to finish what I started. I've been working really, really hard to cut a lot of the red tape that is in the city staff, to push back on political issues and really keep our local values. So when my incumbent comes and talks about wanting to protect our people and wanting to put rent control, well, guess who benefits those people like her that come to study and want to stay, and that move into a district like mine that has a very low voter turnout and that is not educated in a lot of the issues that we have. I have a reputation of building community, working with different organizations to put out resources out there. During COVID, when nobody was physically out in my community, I created the first learning pods with the help of community members where the Wi-Fi was paid for. I was out there distributing food every other day, masks, and I partnered up with big organizations like Direct Relief to bring in toiletry bags, but most importantly, when we are in a time of need, I have always been present. And so the reason that I am continuing to run is because I want to preserve those local values and put the people's issue first before political agenda. It is very clear where my opponent stands.
Wendy, your closing statement?
Thank you, Ryan. I want to remind our community what's at stake here. We have so many of us literally on the brink of having to be pushed out of the city or even ending up homeless because we live paycheck to paycheck. On our everyday lives, often my neighbors and I were worried about walking down certain streets. They're not well lit. There are little improvements in our district that have been unmet for years. And it's the reason I'm running, because I'm tired of seeing the neglect in our district. I'm tired of seeing no action be taken. COVID or no COVID, it's not an excuse to not do your job. Our taxes pay our city council members, and I think the least we deserve is some accountability, a response to an email, a response to a phone call, a text. You know, there is so much at stake here, not just around housing, but, you know, climate change is a thing. We are faced with so many floods, fires. We need to make sure that we are prioritizing our local community. And I am immensely proud to count with so many working families and support from local city workers unions, the Democratic Party, Cause Action Fund, other endorsements I'm not allowed to share yet because they need to share it first. But we have a great team behind us, and we don't have any corporate money, and we never will, because we will never sell out to the corporations, but we do have as people. And that gives me immense hope. Running for city council is a lot of work, and being on the city council, if you show up, it is hard work. But I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. I've been doing this work for years because we've had an absentee representative, so when she wasn't there, I would go and talk to those city council members. Not just me, this has never just been a me thing. It's been a collective of not just organizations, but individuals who are saying, you know what, we're sick of not getting any return from our city. We're sick of not seeing any investments, and we need to make sure that we are We are protecting our working class, that we take bold decisions to really preserve the last remaining working class folks here. Because if we continue down this path, just think about what our life is gonna be like if another 4 years of an absentee rep goes by. Most of us won't be here. I personally live paycheck to paycheck, and I know so many that do. We're all one rent increase from just being out. And then who's gonna be able to afford it? You know, just anyone but our working class. And that is who I'm for. No matter where you were born, no matter where you're from, I heavily believe that you and your children deserve to have the opportunity to thrive in the city and live a healthy life. We have a lot of immigrants in our community, and I would never dare tell them, you're not from here. You don't deserve a safe home. I didn't tolerate it when that rhetoric was said to my parents. I would never tolerate that rhetoric be said to my immigrant neighbors, ever. I'm here to fight for every one of you, because we are one community, and if we don't fight for each other, no one will. So you can count on me to show up and be there and make a change.
Thank you. And Crucito Cruz, your closing statements. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Mary Ann Partridge, for the participation at the Santa Barbara Independence Candidates Forum for District 1. Vote for Crucito Herrera Cruz. My 3-point plan has not changed in all my elections. I have kept it real. My first point is to be a public steward to increase the budget to adult youth services and educational services. Second is to improve and support the public infrastructure and the housing affordability. Third, as an income tax preparer for 20 years in my community, I'm a fiscal conservative, and the city has to be responsible in the financial management of our city's operating budget. What you're going to get with me, a servicer, someone that's going to care for you. I walked over here with my sign from Olive Street, right around the corner. The east side has been marginalized. The east side, the Milpas, needs a straight home improvement district for the east side. State Street needs to be looked at, but all the housing development has happened in District 1, and we have to take care of the affordable, low-income. The Housing Authority has a plan, their own plan. This is their booklet. They have a 5,000 waiting list for people that need entry into affordable subsidized housing through Section 8. There's already 8,000 or about 4,400 units that are supposed to be built in the next 12 or 6 years. How are we going to do that? We should create a TOT tax, and the tourism occupancy tax that is invested from that could be reinvested permanently and strictly for housing affordability. And that's how you can help the developers build. Why the developers don't build? Return on investment. How do we support them? By having a permanent fund for affordable housing. If they don't want to build affordable housing after Prop 33 passes, well, they could pay a fee in lieu of, it's appropriate, that could be reinvested into this trust fund so we could develop and have a permanent housing trust fund. What's happened at Ortega Park is a travesty. Bureaucracy. Planning that wasn't planned in the community. The park is still desolate, unattended, the maintenance needs to be improved. What happened? 5 years ago, they said that they had this grand project. I want everyone to look it up. Go Ortega Park speech, public presentation. Look at what the people say. Look at it. Do your YouTube, Ortega Park. And you realize the bureaucracy and the overspending in our community needs to be stopped because we're not in a structural deficit.
All right, thank you once again to all 3 of our candidates. Let's give them a round of applause once again. And also to our crew from DP News that helped stream this, thank you very much. Gary Atkins, who did the sound, Silvia Uribe for the translation, and of course Mark Alvarado for really putting this together. I think this was a beautiful night to see everybody here. come in, and we ended on time, and I really thank you guys for coming in, and read The Independent, support the club if you can, and please try to introduce yourselves to candidates and get to know them, and keep reading The Independent. We'll be covering this until Election Day. So have a good night.